Shalom and welcome to Biblical Faith with Sam Peake. We invite you to join us as Sam brings a study in the Torah from the Jewish sages. And now our speaker, Sam Peake.
Shalom Aleichem. Peace upon you. Welcome to Biblical Faith. Stay with us. We're still looking at Aleph Tav, Et, the Hebrew alphabet, the Aleph Beit, and the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. We ended the last one. We looked at the last program. We saw how really when Adam gives names to all the animals, it's really a test of the knowledge that God had put into him about how to take the letters of the Hebrew alphabet and what particular letters and in their particular arrangement, in other words, those letters together, would actually create, would actually were in their, it contained all of the spiritual forces that made up, and we looked at two examples of a shor, a bull, and a nesher, an eagle. It is very interesting. What I hope it showed to us is that, as Rabbi Nasson Sherman tells us, he says, having arrived this far, in other words, explaining this far, we now have to acknowledge that the Aleph Beit, the Hebrew alphabet, is not a commonly accepted convention like all other alphabets, and that the order of its letters is not subject to change for the sake of convenience. Let me also give you from Rabbi Monk what he says, Rabbi Michael Monk. He says, in Jewish thought, the Aleph Beit is unlike any other alphabet. It is not merely a haphazard collection of consonants whose order was determined by convention, but that could have been, or still could be, changed without loss of content. The individual letters, their names, their graphic forms, the way they are written, their gematriot, and gematria is where each letter has a number value also, and their respective position, even the place they are at in the Aleph Beit, in the alphabet, are divinely ordained, okay? Ordained by God. What we are looking at, the first created thing, I want to remind you in case you've missed some of these programs, the first created thing that God creates, according to Jewish tradition, according to the oral Torah, is the Hebrew alphabet. It is with this alphabet that He now creates, that He now forms words, that He now puts His thoughts into spoken words and speaks the universe into existence, both the spiritual and the physical worlds, and everything about them. Now we have come to the point where we see that even, let's walk to the board just a minute, that even the actual order, like it here in the word shor, that even the actual order of the word, the Hebrew word for a bull, shor, is going to, these letters in this order, pronounced this way, actually take all the spiritual forces that God puts together to make a shor, to make a bull. That is what puts them together. And this remains in them for all time. Just like the Baal Shem Tov told us that the Word of God remains in the heavens, and this is what keeps it from decaying. This is what keeps it from coming down. Well, this same concept is what keeps animal species. It keeps them staying in the same species, and doesn't allow, really doesn't allow even for the idea of changing, animal change from one species to another species. Okay, now, Rabbi Sherman goes on, he says, this is why the sages of the Torah have always resisted moves to simplify the teaching of the Aleph Beit by regrouping the letters to make them easier for children to understand. You see what he's saying? He says, given the fact that the Aleph Beit predated the creation of the universe. Did you hear what he said? I make a pile there just to get your attention, because everything that we are doing here, for you, a Christian audience, to try to give you from the Jewish tradition and from the oral Torah. Because listen, the New Testament, dear Christian, is a Jewish book written by Jews who were steeped in the oral Torah, written by Jews who knew the oral Torah backwards and forwards, written by Jews who were Kabbalistic, written by Jews like John and Paul, who were very, very attached to the souled level of understanding and who knew this. So when John, in the very first verse of the book of John, and he says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word is God, in other words, reveals God to us, this idea is coming directly from Judaism. That's what I'm trying to tell you. And this idea, how do we form the Word? How did God form the Word? With the letters. So the letters are created before the beginning. They existed with God before the beginning. That's what Rabbi Sherman just said. Given the fact that the Aleph, Beit, the letters, the alphabet, predated creation, and that the alphabet is the protoplasm, oh, I like that, the protoplasm of the universe, the letters and their order are of the utmost importance. He says manufacturers can juggle model names based on market research, and they can shift standard and optional equipment for the sake of commercial viability, but the Aleph Beit was not manufactured by man, so it may not be manipulated by man. The concept, he says, is expressed by the great Kabbalistic Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, a Sephardi rabbi. Listen to what he says. We're going to lots of different sources here in Judaism. Many have assumed, he says, that the letters were conventions. That is, that scholars agreed to assign identifying names to the various vocal sounds. For example, they agreed that the sounds that are formed by the lips, which are, and he gives the Hebrew words pei, mem, vav, beit, all of these are formed by the lips, should be represented by the written forms of those letters. He says, if that were so, he said, then there is no difference between the letters of the Hebrew Aleph Beit and the language symbols of other peoples in their various lands and national groups. In consonance with this view, there emerged a consensus. I'll speak English sometime today, just hang on with me, okay? There is a consensus in which the particular written symbols have no independent validity other than revealing the intent of the speaker or writer. It is like a doctor. I'm glad he gives us an example because he's speaking language that I'm not sure I'm catching everything he's saying. So he gives us an example like any good rabbi, a parable. It is like a doctor who sets forth his knowledge in a medical book. There is no intention that the book itself is a medicine of any sort. Rather, the author's intention is that he wishes to share his knowledge through the book. When the reader thoroughly understands and assimilates the knowledge that is contained in the book, it has no further utility for him. Conversely, if someone were to study the book for several years but does not understand its contents, it does him no good. This is the opinion of some people, he says, regarding the Torah, that once someone knows it, and I've run into this opinion, both opinions here, that once someone knows it, or if someone finds it impossibly difficult, the book has no further value. Such a view, he says, is an impossible absurdity, for surely the words of the Torah restore the soul. The proof of this is that we are required to repeat the weekly portion of the Torah twice in the original text, twice in Hebrew, and once in its Targum, or in other words, other language translation, in other words. Even such words, he says, hold on, let me get my papers together. Even such words as atarot vedibon, he says, and this is from Numbers 32 and verse 3, he said, these are simple place names with no translation, and to which the repetition, in other words, twice in Hebrew and once in a Targum, once in a translation, add nothing because they're just place names. He says, this is an indication of the perfection of the Torah and that it contains an inner meaning, hidden mysteries, spirituality, and vitality. He is exactly correct. In other words, every letter, it cannot be lacking. Isn't this what, dear Christian, isn't this what a big rabbi in the New Testament, I am trying to think of his name, maybe it's Yeshua, yeah, that's his name. This big rabbi in the New Testament talks about how heaven and earth will pass away before one jot, and he's speaking of letters here. A jot is a yud, the smallest Hebrew letter, or tittle, and this is a crown that is put upon the letters, can pass away. I mean, it's not going to happen. This is how important it is. And every jot and tittle must be in the correct order. Rabbi Sherman again. I have this mark, so it must be important. So let me give it to you. He says, only if one appreciates the sanctity of every letter and word of the Torah can one understand why no part of it is insignificant. The Rambam, now when we speak of the Rambam, this is Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon. We take those and make an acrostic out of them, or an acronym, Rambam. He's also known as Maimonides, okay? The Rambam expressed it with classic incisiveness when he wrote in the 8th principle of belief of Judaism that such superficially insignificant verses as, he's going to the Torah, the children of Ham were Cush and Mitzrayim. To him, that's insignificant. And Timnah was a concubine. In other words, to give us this information, he says, these words are no less sacred than the most important verses in Scripture, such as I am Hashem your God and Hear, O Israel. Everything in the Torah, every jot, every tittle, the Rambam concludes, comes from the mouth of the Ein Sof, of the one who is without end, of the omnipresent one, of the omnipotent one. And everything is the perfect Torah of God, pure, holy, and true. Believe it or not, the rabbis in the New Testament say exactly the same thing as what we just looked at. Okay, let's hurry on. We got so much ground to cover, and I'm kind of plowing very slow here, and we need to move on because we have got so much to give you. But I want to make sure that we get this idea in our heads. The first thing that is created is the Aleph, the alphabet, from Aleph to Tav. In fact, the way we can say something is complete, if we have examined it, if we have inspected it, if we have looked at it, me Aleph ve'ad Tav, from Aleph to Tav, that's still different from saying from A to Z. Now, there is one point that we need to mention, and I think we mentioned it in here probably years ago. There's a scholar in Israel, Yitzhak Moseson, who has done tremendous amounts of work, and he shows that Hebrew certainly was the language of God. Hebrew is certainly the language that God spoke, and Hebrew was the language of all the human race. Hebrew was the language of Adam. Hebrew was the language of everyone up until the time of the Tower of Babel, of Babel. And he shows, he actually completely destroys most of the modern linguistic theories of how language came about, because he takes every language on the face of the earth, all of them, and in all of them he can find words that have their roots in the Hebrew language, so that when God came and he confused the languages, what did he do? He balag, he stirred them. And what do you do, by the way, in a bowl? You can even see this in English. The word bowl, what do you do in it? You stir something, you confuse it. And it comes from the Hebrew word balag, which means confusion, to confuse something. So what did God do? He stirred the one language. He stirred it. So in all the other languages now, we have Hebrew roots, that are in all of the other languages. I don't care which language they are. Now, Professor Moseson has really done a great work in that area. Okay. I want to hurry on. I want to get on down the road on a few things, but I want to make sure that I don't pass over anything that Rabbi Sherman has said in his exegesis of this. So let me just go through and point out a few things that he still has in this article that he did. He says, human beings formulate their thoughts in language, and letters are the building blocks of language. When we think, we take our various ideas, thoughts, and desires and distill them into words. Now, we've covered this. Thus, letters represent the raw material with which we express the product of our intelligence. And we have to have a vocabulary of thought. Without letters, we can't even think to ourselves. Did you know that? Without the letters to form the words, we can't even really think to ourselves. We have to have a vocabulary of thought. Rabbi Sherman goes on, he says, the letters of the Aleph Beit are the array of individual spiritual forces through which God articulates his will in creation. Remember, we worked on this for some time. When God's will is carried out, the phenomenon is described as his utterance. One blend of spiritual forces produces light. Another produces heaven and all its fullness. Yet another produces animal life of myriad species, and so on. Do you see what he's saying? It's important that we get what he's saying. The letters that God uses to put together to form words in their order, and the spiritual forces that God created, and himself, by the way, also, because the letters also are a revelation of him, of who he is. So he also is in the letters, for sure. And the way they are put together actually brings about the creation of that thing that it describes. We'll skip this part because we do need to mention this, because this also is a very important idea in rabbinical thought. Let's write it. In rabbinical thought, in the Talmud, in the Oral Torah, it talks about how every man, every human being, not just a man, but every human being, it helps if I put the right letter, see, almost we make a mistake already, is an olam, olam katan. An olam katan. Now, what does olam katan mean? Every human being is an olam katan. In Hebrew, this means a small world, a small universe. Every individual human being is olam katan, a miniature world. True, Rabbi Sherman says, he is but a solitary individual in an infinite universe, but no one should underestimate the power or responsibility of one individual person, one person. The Rambam, we are back to the Rambam again. He tells us that all of creation would be worthwhile were it for the sake of a single tzaddik, a single righteous man. That's interesting, huh? Let's examine this a little further. This is an idea that, now I know we need to go on, but are you in a hurry? I shouldn't always be in such a hurry sometimes. I just don't want to make sure that you don't get bored with what we are doing here, that you consider it valuable enough that you really pay attention, because it's going to help you in other areas. So that's sometimes why I want to push on, because I have so much more to tell you. But sometimes it does us good to stop just a second and look at something a little closer. An olam katan, a miniature world. And the Rambam, who tells us that all of creation would be worthwhile. In other words, God would have created all of the universe only for the sake of a single, now, tzaddik. Excuse me, just one second. What is a tzaddik? A tzaddik is a righteous man, for the sake of one righteous person, okay? Nevertheless, he says, God created everything for the sake of those who would accept and observe His commandments and His Torah. A solitary tzaddik cannot function alone. Now, this is the deal. Look at it. It's amazing the way they look at this. I want you to catch this. So rabbinic, so nice. A solitary tzaddik cannot function alone. He needs the sun. He needs the moon and the stars. He needs rainfall. He needs vegetation. He depends upon the services of other people to grow and deliver his food, maintain his city, provide him services. Though he is only one individual, his presence alone justifies the existence of all creation, because God values quality, not quantity. Ooh, this is from Rabbi Nosson Sherman. Listen to it again. God values quality, not quantity. Let an entire universe exist only for the benefit of a righteous person who is going to carry out the will of God in their life. In that light, he says, the sage's description of each person, all of us, as an olam katan, as a miniature world, or no, I'm sorry, they change it here. They say olam maleh. Olam maleh is a complete world. Not only are we a miniature world, a miniature universe, each one of us as individuals, but we can be complete. We can be a complete universe. He says, That is not inspirational rhetoric. One man's significance can be truly cosmic. You know, we find this in the writings of the rabbis all over and over and over again. The Oral Torah, we find it so much where it talks about so many times that the entire world was actually created only for the sake of Abraham. It's an interesting concept, an interesting idea. Okay. What that tells us, though, look. You say, okay, Sam, that's nice. That's nice that those things are in the Oral Torah. That's real nice. But what does that mean for me? Well, if you take that idea to heart, that the entire universe exists only for the sake of a tzaddik, one righteous person, why not be the righteous person? Why not? Why not do the will of God in your life? Why not be obedient to Him? I think that's the point of it. Why not? If God loves you so much that He created the universe just for you to do His will, then why not do it? That's what I think maybe we can get out of that. Okay, and that it matters. It matters how we live. It matters how we think. It matters what we do. Okay, let's go on. You remember when we started this, just this introduction to the Aleph Tav, just this short introduction actually. We started with Betzalel. Betzalel, let's go back to the board. We started with a man named Betzalel, and that Betzalel, that God had poured into him how to combine the letters with which heaven and earth were created. In other words, Betzalel had this knowledge about the Aleph Tav, about the Et, and all the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. He knew how to combine them. In the Talmud, it goes on to tell us and to demonstrate Betzalel's prowess by showing that he possessed a degree of wisdom that was similar to that with which God created the universe. There's a very, very powerful lesson here. Let's write his name right quick. Betzalel. Betzalel. For some reason. Okay, Betzalel. You find him in the book of Exodus, remember. He is the one. He is the designer of the Talmud. Okay, let's read what Rabbi Sherman says about him. It's amazing. He says, this is the powerful lesson. On one level, we are shown that the construction of the Mishkan, the tabernacle, as an abode for God's presence and a setting for His service, was like the creation itself. Now this gives new thoughts. This gives new oomph to anyone who wants to study the tabernacle or the temple, its construction, how it was made, all of those things that go with it. Do you know that you are actually, look, that the Mishkan is such an amazing thing. Not only it's a picture of God, number one, it gives to us a revelation of Him. It is a revelation of Him. It tells us many, many things about the Mashiach. It's very much involved with prophecies concerning the Mashiach, the Messiah. But it also tells us about the creation of the universe and how the entire universe functions. So it shouldn't surprise us too much that if God is going to put this into the Mishkan, why? Because He is going to live in it. He is going to actually rest His presence in it. That He must go to Betzalel. He must find someone who is willing and who is able for him to pour the knowledge into concerning the Aleph Tav, with which God created the universe. Because an understanding of this is absolutely necessary in order to build the tabernacle. Okay. He says, the purpose of human existence is to make earthly life worthy of God's presence. Wow. And to lead all mankind to acknowledge Him. Since that's the case, it stands to reason that the wisdom that was exercised by God in creating the universe should, to the extent humanly possible, be had by those who build His tabernacle upon the earth. Betzalel, who did so, was qualified by virtue of his ability to utilize the spiritual forces that were inside the sacred letters of the Hebrew alphabet. So Rabbi Sherman says it would seem, in fact, he's going to find another place now concerning Solomon. And we'll close the program with this thought. He said it would seem that a knowledge of the sacred letters and what they represent was always a prerequisite for one who undertakes to build God's dwelling place upon the earth, God's temple. In commenting on Proverbs 30 and verse 1, the Midrash says of King Solomon, "The words of the man, Solomon, upon whom the Holy Spirit rested," and then it has a very strange thing. It says, Le'itiel. And this is a name that the Midrash interprets as the one who understands, guess what? Ha'otiot, the letters. The one who understands the letters of God. You see what they're saying? Solomon. Why could Solomon build the temple? Because God gave to him an understanding of the letters of God, the letters of creation, because he is going to create, literally. Ezra, the builder of the second temple, in the same way, the builder of the second temple, Ezra is known as a sofer, a scribe. And what does a scribe do? A scribe works with the letters of God, with the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. This is his main occupation. I mean, this is everything that he is about. We're going to pick back up in the next program with this thought, because this is a very important thought, and I'm not sure I'm getting it across good, concerning the temples, concerning the tabernacle, and concerning the Aleph Tav, the letters of God. I hope you're enjoying this study. We haven't even done the first letter yet. We're just still looking at why it's important for us to be involved with, and why it's important for us to look into the letters of the Hebrew alphabet, the Hebrew Aleph Bet. And please, for you Christians, I know in the New Testament there are so many things, there are so many references, and we've already looked at a few of them that also are making reference to these letters and identifying these letters with the person of Yeshua in the New Testament. So we'll cover those too. Shalom uvracha, peace and a blessing.
Thank you for joining us in our study. If you enjoyed this study and are interested in learning more from the Torah and the sages of Israel, then check us out on the internet at www.bfm101.com. Or you may contact us toll-free at 1-800-639-0169. Our mailing address is Biblical Faith, P.O. Box 2, Abilene, Texas, 79604. Until next time, we wish you Shalom Uvracha, peace and a blessing.